Happy Sunday, everyone. I'm coming at you live from our family's cabin where I am on a little kind of work retreat for a few days. So, not in my usual circumstances, and this may be a shorter one compared to what I've done before. But as I was thinking about what I could talk about today, I I have a long list. In fact, I've had several people suggest different topics that I've added to my list. I have, got my own long list of things that I could go over. And one of the things that popped out to me when I was thinking about what to cover today was this question of why I'm in the church, why I have a testimony, why I quote unquote still believe. I've gotten this question many times over the years. Perhaps in part because of the perception that I'm a, intelligent individual or whatnot. And so as friends have left the church or lost their faith or no longer believe, I'm often posed that question because many of these individuals, I often consider these people friends, consider themselves enlightened, that they have now left the church or shifted their beliefs in part due to an enlightenment. They are now more educated. They have discovered something. How can I be so smart on these things over here and be an idiot on theological things over here? And that's kind of the presumption oftentimes behind the question. The question often also presumes that I haven't read what they have, or I don't know what they've quote unquote discovered about, church history or whatnot. And so it's like, Connor, you research everything. Why have you not yet come across this? Because if only you would come across these things, you, like me, would, change your opinion and change your beliefs. And so that's often the lens, perhaps not always, but that's often the lens through which these people are looking at the circumstance. It's how they're framing their question. And, because I consider many of these people friends and understand they're on their own faith journey or whatever, I try and be very kind of patient or forgiving, because I might otherwise consider it kind of insulting. It's like, look, if you think I'm a smart person, can't you allow me a measure of compassion to presume that in all my intelligence, I've studied the things you have and have come to a different conclusion or see something perhaps you don't. But no, it's hey, you're ignorant unless and until you, adopt the opinion I have and come to agree with me or whatnot. So that's often, the framing of it. And again, because these people are friends, I try not to kind of take it as an insult, although I think on its face it is a bit insulting. So I figured that I would share, perhaps for the first time publicly, why I still believe. I've had many people in Facebook comments over the years, for example, when I do post something, more focused on faith, who will come in and be like, oh, I can't believe you still believe that. Or, oh, you need to go read this or watch this, or, maybe one day you'll, your eyes will be open. I mean, all these like snide comments. And I don't think ever really responded to those. I let them be. Sometimes they get pretty vulgar or profane, and then I, nix them. But I just kind of let other people engage in the comments, and I don't really do anything myself. So maybe this is the first time I've addressed this. I don't recall doing it so prior, but I thought I would just share a few thoughts as to why I still believe. Me, quote unquote, smart person who reads a lot and really tries to like dig in and study things, like how can I still believe in God and, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and all these things. Several years ago, gosh, it's probably been about a decade. I'm going to start here. I've got 4 or 5 different things to touch on. But one of the big ones for me was expressed pretty well by Elder Holland about a decade ago. He had a conference address where he held up one of the early copies of the Book of Mormon, the same one used in Carthage jail by Hiram and Joseph, and you remember this, the page was turned down, and he holds it up there, and he said something there that really kind of summarized my own feelings on the matter. He said, like, look, if people leave this church, they have to go over or around or under the Book of Mormon. He said it far more eloquently. It is a fantastic address worth reading because it really presents, in my mind, the imperative question. The Book of Mormon is the linchpin of, a gospel in the Restoration. And while some people may say, okay, well, there's many branches of Mormonism, and doesn't mean that, the mainstream church is the right one. There's all these offshoots, and I'm going to set aside that topic for another day, perhaps. But the Book of Mormon has to be dealt with. And, I have people who are like, oh, well, Joseph, copied this. There was a book that was written at the time that had, a similar town name from one of the Nephite, settlements and all these things. And Jeremy Runnels and all the rest, the CES letter, and definitive proof that, the Book of Mormon was a fraud. Like, give me a break. I've read all these things. I've looked at them all. None of them account for the actual miracle that is the Book of Mormon. Does that mean that Joseph Smith didn't in any way borrow from something, or use something, or interpret as something? Or no, like there's room for that type of stuff in what Joseph did. Just as he's quoting Isaiah and pulling these things, like there's room for all that. It's like people who attack evolution. I'm like, I don't think evolution and Christianity are necessarily at odds. I think, Darwin's theory and an anti-God theory of evolution are at odds, but God can use evolution to create new species. Like, that's allowable within the, spectrum of his abilities. And so too with Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. God's process can utilize, different resources at the time, Joseph's knowledge, insights he may have had, things he may have remembered, just like the temple and masonry are very intertwined. Does that mean that, what's in the temple is a fraud? No, it just means that God, works with the things we know and are used to and have access to. So if you don't believe, like, it's one, the Book of Mormon exists. It has to be accounted for. I have studied all the things that I can get my hands on over the past couple of decades. I have read all the anti-material. Always worries my mom, or always used to, or whatever, right? Like, oh, don't read that. Like, I've read it all. And granted, a lot of it's regurgitated. So, new things that come out. It's like half of the things that, was in the CES letter have been claimed by other people and long debunked and whatever. So, I have found, so why do I believe? I have not found a satisfactory answer for the existence of the Book of Mormon other than what its origin story claims as its origin story. In other words, Joseph Smith transliterated the Book of Mormon. This, ignorant farm kid who lacked a, decent education was able to do in far less time what, scholarly people would take 5 times or more longer to do. I mean, it's just the math doesn't work out. The testimonies are there. The people who knew him, like, there's just no way. What was the quote? I don't remember. I'm not as prepared with all these quotes and resources this time since I'm away on a work trip. But there's the quote that someone shared that's like, if either it's the work of God or the work of the devil. In other words, like, it's so spectacular and miraculous that either it is what it is, or this is the byproduct of the devil. Like, there's no way under the circumstances of the time, the resources and knowledge that Joseph had, to produce something that has withstood all of this analysis. That all these, Elder Holland talked about the Semitic structures, like just the chiasmus, chiasmus, I don't remember how to say that, but CHIASMUS, this early Semitic literary device where you'd kind of, if you ever never looked into this, it's fascinating. There's several parts of the Book of Mormon where they start with something and they end with something, and then so there's a second point, which is the second to last point, and so on until you reach the middle, which is like the emphasis point. And there's several parts of the Book of Mormon that have this beautiful literary structure in it, the center of which is talking about Jesus. And I remember reading, I think it was John Welch years ago at Farms who would write about that. And so I just, and look, I've been open to a lot. I've read what my friends have sent me. I've looked at all these anti-books. I've read the CES letter. I've done all the things. And I have not found anyone who can provide an answer other than the one that Joseph and the witnesses gave. I just can't. So that leads me to my second point of why I still believe, and that is, to me, the gospel of Jesus Christ is rational. I'm a very rational thinker. My testimony is not really an emotional one. You see a lot of these people who get up and, cry and blubbery, and they feel, and they, that's fine. That's great. I'm just not that kind of person. I'm like 90% more on the intellectual side in terms of my gospel testimony, and then 10% like spirit, emotion, feeling, whatever. And so to me, the gospel is rational. That life is not spontaneous. We did not originate from goo. Darwin's theory fails on so many accounts. It is. I don't agree with it at all. I don't think sure, maybe there was a big bang in a sense, but our creator may have done that to facilitate, what came, like, I can't remember his name, but there's some fascinating work of this, oh man, I shouldn't even mention it. I was reading his book the other day about this guy talking about the problems with Darwin and all these new evolutionary biology kind of advancements and discoveries that suggest a creator. Really interesting stuff. I also watched one of his YouTube videos. If someone may know who I'm talking about, can link in the comments. But it's not Richard. That's Richard Dawkins. I was thinking of I can't remember. I'll have to go pull up my Amazon order list and see who it was if no one else can remember. Anyways, the point is, I don't believe in Darwin's theory at all. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's people who are intentionally trying to come up with another answer other than what to me is the rational one, and that is a creator. I mean, I'm sitting here at our cabin. I'm looking out at nature right now. Like, all things denote there is a God, as it says in the Book of Mormon. I mean, even just the sacred math, and sacred geometry, and looking at the the spirals and the fractals and like all these things that I'm just like, I don't think the complexity of life, in all its profound complexity and yet simplicity at the same time, and uniformity and these echoes and all these things that you find in nature that are fascinating. I don't think you can chalk that up to biological randomness. I think things devolve, not evolve. I think things naturally decay. Entropy is real. You don't have life improving and improving and improving. That's just not really the way it works. And so to me, it's rational to believe that there's a creator. And if there's a creator, it's rational to me that that the creator takes an active role in our lives rather than an inactive role. It's rational to me that the creator is a father figure of sorts rather than this dispassionate substance that can't be named or identified or whatever, right? That like this creation would be an echo of other creations, that things would be made naturally as they are spiritually. I mean, the atonement itself is rational. This, it's irrational to me that if there is a creator and if there is an afterlife, which to me is rational, as I work it out in my own mind, it's rational also to me that our creator would not condemn people who simply had never heard of the gospel or never knew what they needed to do to arrive in heaven, or quote unquote heaven. This binary heaven and hell, I think, is not the right model at all. But the point is, like, the things that we're supposed to do, many people don't know about them. They don't know about the gospel, and so it's rational to me that there is a process by which those individuals can still be able to be on the same plane as us and not be punished just because they were born into Aboriginal Australia or whatever and never encountered missionaries or were taught the gospel. And so it's rational to me that there is mercy in addition to justice. It's rational to me that there's baptism for the dead and there's saving ordinances and abilities to allow other individuals to attain the same post-mortal fate that you and I will. These things make sense to me. I mean, they just sound rational. They sound logical. Like if there is an afterlife, then you got to make sense of that. And if there is a God, then you have to make sense of that. And if there is a Savior, which again, also to me, given mercy and justice and all the rest, like, makes sense. That part of the plan of salvation makes sense. It also makes sense to me that he wouldn't treat the Jews as some like special favorable people and like ignore everyone else on the earth. It makes sense to me that God would visit other people too, that God would care about all of his children, not just those who happen to be birthed in the area around Jerusalem. And so therefore it makes sense to me that Jesus would visit other people, that he would have many sheep who aren't of the Jerusalem fold, and he would visit. And it makes sense to me that he would tell them to write these things down for their posterity, just as people in Jerusalem, like, it's like, if this, then that, and if this, then that. And like if we accept that, there's a God, then there are certain conclusions that we have to draw from that. And then if we accept those conclusions, we have other, like Elder Holland, I think, said this in his remark. It's like, if the Book of Mormon exists, then Joseph was a prophet. And if Joseph was a prophet, then he restored the church, right? And then if he restored the church, then all these things start following. So to me, as I kind of work these things through, like, it's a very intellectual process. There is the spiritual confirmation. I have prayed about the Book of Mormon. I do have a spiritual basis for my testimony, but I am a very kind of heavily like logical thinker, and the gospel appeals to me on that basis. Not just that it appeals to me, it makes sense to me. Like, I believe in it because as I kind of lay it out, it answers a lot of questions. And what I found with a lot of friends, not all of them, but many of my friends and acquaintances who have abandoned their faith, either become atheists or agnostics, right? Because it's like, you can't leave the richness of the restored gospel and then go to the, what I would call, kind of the unanswered blandness of general Christianity that just lacks so much of these answers. And has, from my perspective, an inability to address these very complex questions, right? What happens to a little kid before they die, or what happens to people who never heard the gospel, and like all these things, right? And so that's why I think, in part, people who leave the restored gospel just, they can't really latch on, many of them, to anything else. There's no other theology that provides the same degree of substance and answers to the questions that Mormonism purports to. And so they just kind of like, I don't believe in anything, and or I intentionally believe that there's not a God. I consciously and proactively believe, right? And so I see this like big pendulum swing between where they go. But that's another answer for me. So there's the Book of Mormon, and then there's this idea that it's like rational and logical, which I understand may totally sound weird to people, to kind of predicate your religious belief system on a rational foundation, because many people would say that all these things that I believe are irrational, right? And I get that, but it makes far more sense to me than any other belief system or set of explanations that I've encountered, because I don't think life is, meant to, we just exist and then we die. Like that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, so I'll end there. To me, the gospel is very rational. I mentioned this a little bit, but another reason why I believe, again, because I've not really found answers to all these complex and important questions elsewhere, including in all the anti-material so-called, right, attempting to disprove the foundational claims of Mormonism. I've not found it persuasive at all. It's like stretching so hard to try and pull things together to create a set of claims that it's like one of those things that it's like not very well thought out. It's just like, here's this random tidbit, and if I say this way and manipulate that, and if I just like throw mud at the wall, then people's testimonies will kind of be broken, right? It's not this coherent set of arguments. It's like this scattershot, this shotgun of like loosely concocted arguments and misleading claims and incomplete, explanations and all these things that, look, I am not one, as many of you know, to believe that like the official narrative of things is necessarily accurate. I think church history, for example, is far more nuanced than official church history sources have long claimed them to be. And I think modern interpretations and administrative handbooks and blah, 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 like all these things, I think there's, concerns I have with them. And I think there's more nuance than they often offer. So it's not that it's like the official position is the right one and all other things are wrong. But that doesn't, my concerns with those things does not mean that the critics are right. It does not mean that like it's all wrong. It just means that, individuals who are imperfect are trying to administer a church in the way that maybe they think best, but I might have a concern with or something. That doesn't mean that the foundational theological claims and the, priesthood and baptism and, modern revelation, all these things like go out the window. And I see many people just throw these things out the window the moment that they like hit this struggle or see something that they kind of disagree with or have a tough time with or something in church history. It's like, oh, okay, everything out the window, everything I long claimed to believe. And my concern is like, I feel like a lot of people's testimonies are not that deep. There are these like shallow testimonies, and they don't really get in and challenge themselves and read the complex church history and struggle with the issues that happened back then and the claims other people are made, and they don't really like wrestle with these things. And so they don't deepen their testimony. They have this like primary, like, oh, I believe these things and blah, 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 and, the milk of the gospel. And then some, claim comes crashing against them, or they encounter the CES letter, or their best friend leaves the church, or, some faith crisis happens, right? The church comes out against medical marijuana, or, says that COVID vaccines are a literal godsend and everyone is urged to get them, or whatever the issue is. And because so many of these people, it's like Jesus's analogy of the seed, right? That you cast it on like this, sidewalk, the path or whatever, and it's like hard ground, and so the seed can't take root, and then there's the fertile soil. And we always think when we read that parable, oh, that's other people, right? People not in our church or whatever. And yet I know so many people in the church whose testimonies are like surface thin, right? Those seeds have not really deepened. There's a book that I read a few years ago that the title is "The Obstacle is the Way." In other words, so often we try and like go around obstacles. Oh, there's a challenging thing. Let me sidestep that. I don't want to confront that. I want to go this path of least resistance to have a comfortable gospel, that where I don't have to, encounter these tough issues. And so we never flex our theological muscles. We never strengthen, rather, our theological muscles. The obstacle is the way. In other words, if there's a big boulder in your path, you push against it. And you're probably not going to move at first because you're weak. But the more you push, you're strengthening yourself so that you can then overcome that obstacle and move it out of your path. But if we avoid those obstacles, if we avoid those theological challenges and those, competing arguments or people claiming other things or nuanced history or controversy or whatever, if we avoid those things, we have this very kind of simple testimony that is going to be crushed by something that we can't avoid, that it just smacks us right in the face. So to me, like, I don't recommend you go out and read all these like horrible, things or misleading things or whatever. It's not exactly for the, faint of heart or light of testimony. I'm not going to suggest anyone does it, but I chose to. And it's like I mentioned with Rough Stone Rolling, right? A lot of people are like, oh, it portrays Joseph Smith in a negative light. I talked about this a few weeks ago. To me, it was a testimony builder. Here's God taking this completely imperfect person and turning him to the amazing person that he was. Still imperfect, but doing these amazing things. And how much of a confidence booster that is for me, who is way more imperfect, right? That God can still use me to do great things. It's not for us to judge people 200 years ago and look how imperfect they were, and he was treasure hunting and all these things. Therefore, everything he did was wrong. It's equivalent to the idiots today who are tearing down Thomas Jefferson's statue because the guy owned slaves. Like, yeah, he owned slaves. It was wrong. That doesn't discount all the other things he did that was right and the ideas he had that he himself thought slavery was a problem, right? Like, history has nuance, and we can't just sit here on our perch and just like judge people from the past. I think it's the same thing with church history too. But again, if we don't confront it, we're not going to strengthen our testimony. And I think that's a big problem too. So that's another reason I believe, is because I don't think any of the anti-things are persuasive to lead me to conclude that the things that I believe are wrong. I just don't. I'm going to be light on this one, and that is, another reason I believe is because of the spiritual experiences I've had, and they've happened, and I've prayed, as I said, about whether the Book of Mormon is true. I've received a confirmation. I believe it is. I've had many confirming experiences in my life, whether on my mission or since, that the things I believe are indeed, accurate, that God does exist, and it's not like I've gotten every single answer I want or explicit confirmation for every little tidbit of testimony. I don't think that's the way it works. It's not what I've sought out. But again, like, if the foundational things in my mind are confirmed to me, then there's a lot of these kind of like dominoes that fall. I don't need to know, right, like the minutia, right? I just need to know that the foundation is the right one that I can build my testimony on. And that's enough for me. And I've gotten that. And I'm good, right? Like and by the way, this is kind of a tangent, but like, I don't believe the church is true. I believe the gospel is true. I've never really liked when people get like, I know in the Doctrine and Covenants it says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the only true and correct church, et cetera, right? Like, I think that was said that way for a reason. But when people get up and they're like, I believe the church is true, I believe, the church is true, like, I don't believe institutions are true. I believe ideas are true. I believe facts are true. And so when I bear my testimony, I believe in the gospel. I believe God exists and loves us. I believe, that the scriptures are real, that Revelation is real, that Book of Mormon was, translated by Joseph, that God visited. Like, I believe those things. Those are ideas or facts, right? Those things can be true. I don't believe institutions are true, which is why I think in the Doctrine and Covenants, like sometimes you can say like this table is true, like it's sturdy, it's strong, it's it's built correctly. Like there may be a interpretation or whatever that that's what was meant by the church is true. Like this is my church, God's saying, right? And I've set it up in the Joseph has set it up in the correct way. This is the true and correct church. And so I think maybe it's more of that. I don't think. Because, like, the church can do stupid things. Like, people at the helm of the church can make wrong decisions. Imperfect people administrating the church can, take it off course maybe in one action, and then there's a little course correction. Like, there's room for course corrections. It's like Elder Uchtdorf talking about years ago about how when a plane flies from one place to another, it's all these tiny little deviations along the way. It's never a straight line. I think there's room for the institution of the church and the people administering its programs and everything to have these little deviations. I don't think it goes horribly off course. I'm not claiming that, but to say, anyways, I don't bear my testimony that the church is true. I think the gospel is true, and I think that's important. Okay, the final thing I'm going to end with is in terms of why I still believe, and that is because for me, belief is a choice, right? Like, I can argue that the gospel is logical. I can list my reasons. I can claim some things are even objective facts. And we can debate those and discuss whether that's true. But ultimately, belief is a choice. I can be demonstrating something factual and objective to someone, and they can still choose to not believe it, right? I mean, people believe climate change is caused, by humans, even though there's, data to the contrary that people don't want to encounter. People can claim that, you're going to die from COVID if you don't get the vaccine. Like, people can believe whatever they want, whether the facts exist to support those beliefs or not. And so belief, what you think, the lens through which you look at the world, that you understand your own life, the things that you hypothesize or theorize about things that simply can't be proven, these things are ultimately a choice. We get to choose. And I don't think we should choose lightly. I don't think it's like, oh, what type of cereal should I have for breakfast, right? Like, it's not an immaterial choice of no consequence. It's a choice of significant consequence, right? But to me, it's this question of, do our choices produce good fruit, right? Or do they produce bad fruit? And look, I know many people who have kind of lost their testimony in the gospel, quote unquote, but they still go through the motions, whether because of a spouse or for their kids or family members or other reasons, right? And they'll still kind of go to church and kind of be a cultural Mormon, but not a practicing one. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to knock these people, but I think in part what they recognize outside of those familial pressures is like, a lot of times trying to do the good things in life will produce good results. Being a good person and not, getting intoxicated or whatever, right? And not stealing and, not being vulgar and all these things. Like, trying to be a good person, which is ultimately what the gospel is all about, loving God, loving other people. Like, fine, if you don't want to love God, if you're now agnostic, atheist, whatever, like the second greatest commandment is loving other people, which is really how we love God. And so if you're a type of person who is going to be kind-hearted and serve other people and look for ways to help and compliment other people and be nice and not be part of contention or whatever, like, whether you believe in the same God I do or read the same scriptures or sit in a pew next to me on Sundays for an hour, like, ultimately that doesn't matter. What matters the most is loving one another. And so I think there are people who, even though they might disagree with, our theological claims, can still emulate those types of actions, can still be good people. I think they'll be rewarded for that by the God that I believe in the afterlife that I believe in. And they may not believe those things, but there are plenty of people who believe the things I do that suck at doing those things, right? That suck at loving other people. And so just because they have the beliefs does not mean that they'll get the rewards. So ultimately, to me, belief is a choice, and I choose to believe these things. And I think it's a good choice. I've, evaluated the alternatives. I've looked at other faiths. I've considered no faith. I've, wondered what my life would be like if I didn't have these kind of moral standards and expectations or whatever. Like, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of alternatives you can choose. You don't have to do these things. I don't have to do these things. But on the whole, looking in the aggregate at my life, all these series of choices and the direction I want my life to go and the things that I want to consider, ponder, emulate, and act on, to me, ultimately, I feel like this is the right choice. I feel it's a logical choice. I think that the specifics they make sense to me, but even if they didn't, even if I had a more superficial testimony, I look at the fruits, and these are good fruits. They're good for me, they're good for my kids, they're good for society. Again, people can bear these fruits, even if they don't believe the things that I believe, and that's great. But to me, these beliefs are useful, they're logical, they're helpful, they're, they're I don't know what the word is, they make me feel good, they resonate with me. That's why I still believe. Lots of reasons. I don't think it's right to attack other people for what they believe. I know there's a lot of people who, it's like that old quote of like, oh, people who leave the church can't leave it alone, and that the kind of Mormon cultural whatever is such that when people leave the faith, they have to like pick at it and attack it and disprove it, and they have this like obsession. I don't think all people do. I think that's probably a little overblown. I know many people who, believe different things now than I do that are totally great people and respect my beliefs, and I respect theirs, and that's great. I don't think that we need to be, contentious about it. I get that it's a very personal thing for a lot of people, and I get that people who feel like the church lied to them all these years, or they encountered that one thing and now they feel that, they've been deceived their whole life. Like some of those people feel hurt, I think wrongly, but that's the way they feel. And so they want to kind of lash out and attack a system that they felt was being malicious towards them. That's not the way I see the world. I don't think that's correct at all, but that's how these people look at it. So, I know a lot of people who are on different faith journeys, including, of course, plenty of people who never have believed the things that I do, who are great people. And we can have amazing discussions of what we each believe in a very respectful way. But the why I started this and where I'm going to end it here is I really dislike the notion that because that you cannot be both an educated person and a believing person, right? This idea of, again, that people have asked me many times in my life, Connor, you seem like a smart guy. Why do you still believe in those things? Right? To me, that's a stupid question. It's just a stupid question. I might throw the same thing back at them. Like, you seem like a smart guy. Why have you completely abandoned all, belief in, in the afterlife or whatever? Like, and we could talk about and have a respectful debate about whether it's rational to believe in an afterlife or not. But the premise is the problem. And to think that I'm not educated enough because I still cling to these theological fantasies or whatever, that's ridiculous. I reject the premise. I think it's unhelpful and unproductive. And so, yes, I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person, and I consider myself a very faithful and believing person. And how do I reconcile the two? I don't think I need to. They're very complementary. I don't see any inconsistency or conflict. And I think that those who claim that there is an inherent conflict are flat out wrong. I haven't seen that conflict in my life. I don't think that it's inherent, and I think it's a fiction. I think it's a fictional premise that once you're educated sufficiently, you will abandon these kind of playthings from your upbringing and your past. So those are some of the reasons why I believe. I don't see that changing anytime soon, and maybe some of that resonates with you, but I thought I'd come on and share, and hope you guys all have a great Sunday. See you later.